Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. We've got a very juicy topic for you today, so let's listen. What's the worst, most damaging way that you took revenge? Please remember to like, share, tell us yours, and subscribe. I got to dispense a little justice to my neighbor once. I met the neighbor sitting outside shining boots. He was in the Army National Guard. I walked over to introduce myself and we talked a bit about the Army. I helped him shine his boots and pulled a couple of beers out of the cooler that I kept in the back of my truck. Fast forward a few months, and I'm silently wondering if I'm an alcoholic. The case of beer that I bought day before yesterday had dwindled to a six-pack. I shrugged it off. I drove my wife's car to work one day that week. My wife worked in a shop across the street and phoned me to tell me that she's been watching the neighbor climb into my truck and stuff his pants with my beer. At first, I was going to confront him and demand restitution, but I decided that I could avenge my missing cans of beer by switching to bottles. So I switched, and when they were empty, I refilled them with recycled beer and recapped, put them in my cooler, and waited patiently. A few went missing. I waited. Nothing else was taken. My point was made. A neighbor who I never met accused me of trying to stab her dog through a double fence this winter. They have a wooden 6-foot stockade fence surrounded by a 4-foot chain link fence. The dog was injured on something in their backyard and required several stitches, which resulted in a large vet bill that they couldn't afford. They concocted the story that their animal-hating neighbor did this and began a fundraiser and raised quite a sum of money, way more than the bill was. I had no idea about this whole drama until the friend in the police department told me of what this wacko was accusing me of. So, once I found out, I requested a copy of the police report where the neighbor stated that the dog was hurt in their yard. There wasn't any blood or human footprints near the fence, etc., and I posted it to the fundraising site. She lost friends and reputation for $400. Not exactly the worst revenge, but I think it's funny. My ex-mother-in-law was one of those a wife serves her husband and does everything kind of people. She always criticized me, my housework, the meals I cooked, etc. I decided to get even by filling a sock with the dust of my vacuum canister. Every day, I'd stop by her house and take a moment to shake the sock around her house. It left dust everywhere. The floors were the easiest. Everyone's socks would get dirty from walking around. Her husband was noticing she wasn't doing her duty. The best was when I went and shook the dust all over her couch pillows and returned that night. I made a show of flopping down on the couch from being so exhausted from work. Dust went everywhere. Her husband was like, "What the hell? Don't you even vacuum?" This is my dad's story from when he was a kid. He was walking down the road one day when a bunch of kids in their late teens pulled up in a car and sprayed him with a fire extinguisher. He blew it off as a joke and thought it was pretty funny. 5 minutes later, the same kids circle around and spray him a second time. This time, my dad took note of the license plate number, make, and model of the car and proceeded to track it down and find out where the kid lived. That night, he went to the kid's house and threw a fire extinguisher through the car's windshield. Justice was served. When I was 11, there was a guy in a year above me that used to be a bully. He would stand over everyone, and he was a massive for a 12-year-old. One day after doing PE, physical education class, I went to get changed into uniform in the changing room that was backed into his classroom. Just my luck, this douche happens to be in there. What are the odds? Anyway, a few words are exchanged before he shoves me really hard into all these school bags that were stored in there and leaves. When I dusted myself off, something caught my eye. It was his bag. His mom had written his name in big bold letters, so I thought, F him, and had a look, and to my great joy, discovered the sickest Dragon Ball Z card collection. He was a rich kid as well as a bully, and had them at school to show off. So yeah, I stole them, and never looked back. After school, I saw him crying like a bitch, telling his mom that they were missing. Okay, so I'm on board with most of these, mildly devious here and there. This one I personally disagree with. You want to measure your revenge accordingly. Stealing, not cool. Was at a huge music festival in Wales. Long story short, some muscle douchebag raver assholes stole all our booze out of our tent and drank the stuff in plain sight while laughing at us all. We confronted them, they denied it, they were much bigger than us and were surrounded by their friends. So next day, they all leave to go to the main venue tents, and my mate runs, dives into their tent, and disappears for a good 10 minutes. I'm wondering what the hell he's doing, so I walk over and open up the tent, only to find him squatting over a hole he dug in the ground in the middle of their tent, and he's taking the biggest shit I've ever seen, just nonchalantly pooping in this hole. He finishes up, drags the canvas flooring back over this hole. We take a quick look for any booze we can have, but none that we could find, and we walk back to our tent. For the rest of the festival, we can hear these "See You Next Tuesdays" shouting about the ripe smell of shit everywhere, until one of the lads' girlfriends decides to drag the canvas bottom out of the tent and find the hidden treasure trove of shit. Suffice to say, they had pissed off more people than just us, so when they confronted us, all we could do was deny it completely and laugh, surprised we didn't get beaten up simply for taking the piss out of the situation like we did. It was a good festival. Chase and Status weren't bad, found more booze, used the porta potties from then on. When I was around 12 and my brother was like 13 or 14, we had a race to get to the shower. He only wanted to take one because I said I was going to take one. Naturally, he beat me there. To take revenge, I flushed the downstairs toilet. I don't know if anyone lived in that old of a house before, but our house was close to 100 years old. That messes with the water temperature. It was shooting out fiery, hot, boiling lava water. I kept flushing it. I flushed it every single time I could. He called me upstairs about 45 minutes later. He said the water was too hot and that he couldn't figure out what to do. He had shampoo in his eyes and he couldn't rinse it off. We turned off the shower and I took him outside to our backyard. I sprayed him down with the hose, the whole time him telling me what a good sister I was and how much he appreciated this. People we knew walked by our street. They thought it was hilarious. I wasn't going to tell him. I was going to save it and do it every single time he got to the shower. But my mom caught me the next time I did it, and she told everyone. It's my one story, the only time I gave as good as I got. When I was in middle school, I got picked on a lot. I was that really big kid who just did not stand up for himself. Every new school I went to, it usually started okay until one kid would test me and see me not do anything about it. Then it would spread like wildfire. Needless to say, I had a miserable time in middle school. It was the spring, and at the time I was part of the track team. Being a bigger kid, that meant throwing shot put and discus. There was this one fat F named Eric, who wasn't all too popular himself, and he had decided to earn some cred for himself. He would start laying into me. I would snap back at him every time he insulted, but I didn't want to take it past there, and he knew this. The constant insults continued for weeks. Every day after school, I had to stay for practice for a couple hours, and here was Eric constantly heckling me. One day, I decided I'd had enough. My mind was made up. I was either going to get the shit kicked out of me, or I was going to demolish this F. Having never been in a fight before, I worked out how I wanted to do this for quite a while in my head before beginning. Meanwhile, the whole time he just kept running his mouth. I was at the point between tears and blind rage. I was standing in the discus ring, holding the discus, and there was his fat ginger face cackling at me. I decided I would throw the discus at him and then charge. In my mind's eye, I imagined that the discus would hit him in the arm or back, or possibly even get slapped away as I ran toward him. After all, I tossed it underhanded like a frisbee, not what I thought had any force behind it. Nope. Instead, he just stood there, staring at the discus, flew toward his face. I will never forget the sound and sight of what the discus made contact. I could hear his jaw shatter as heavy spits of blood shot from his face. See, Eric had braces, and not only did the discus break his jaw and burst straight through his bottom lip, but it also quickly dislodged most of his front teeth, sending his brace wires sprawling and all digging into the flesh of his cheeks and gums. The amount of blood pouring from his face was nauseating, and all of a sudden, the rage that had been building inside of me was gone and replaced by immense sadness for him. He took off running toward the coaches, and I was right behind him. I couldn't contain my crying as I followed step by step behind him, hearing the gargling wails and screams for help. We were both ushered into the coach's office quickly. I was too hysterical to answer my questions. The ambulance came and picked him up, and my way overprotective and somewhat sociopathic older brother came and sheltered me from the barrage of incriminating questions coming from the coaches. My brother grabbed me to pull me out of the room and take me home. The coach shoved past him and pushed me back into the chair, stating that I wasn't going anywhere. My brother turned around and knocked him out cold, and we left. Over the next few days, everyone kept their distance from me at school. The principal finally called me in and asked that I write a statement of what happened. I said it was an accident and that it slipped. Turns out the rest of the guys who were around had turned in statements saying the same thing. A while later, they confessed they thought Eric had it coming, and they were glad I had finally stood up for myself. Truth is, I don't feel great about it. As an adult, it's one of the memories that haunts me. What makes it even worse, we moved that year, and I ended up going to a different nearby high school in the same district. Freshman year at track practice, the coach sat us down and told everyone my story as a cautionary tale of safety. I don't think he knew it was me he was speaking about. Over the next few years, I would hear classmates and teachers and other people in the community repeat it as almost an urban myth. All the while, I sat quietly knowing the true story, because it was about me. Okay, again, if you're seeking out revenge, you want to measure it. Now, you wanted to be physical, which is an option. I'd bow against it, but it happens. But you have to assume that if that discus was released into the air, it could have done significant damage to that person. So, I don't know, maybe not use a weapon? A woman rear-ended me pretty bad, told me not to call the cops because she was on the way to an AA meeting and she would lose her license. She called her boyfriend, who was a lawyer, and he told me to let her go. Told me to come to his office and he would pay cash for all repairs if I brought an estimate. Did as requested. Lawyer laughed at me and said there was no proof and I wouldn't get a cent. I was completely broke and knew I could not afford the repairs, and furthermore the car was not legally drivable as it was. Late on another night, I went to the AA meeting via bicycle. She had said where it was in passing, and I checked the schedule. I confronted her on her way out. She confessed her license was suspended, and she had been driving without a license that day. Since it was summer, I had days free from class and rode my bicycle to the lawyer's office for a few days to learn his schedule from across the street. Slowly, a plan for revenge took shape in my mind. When I knew his beautiful car would be unattended for a while, I filled his gas tank with sand and sugar, loads of it. At the time, I lived in a bad neighborhood, and there were always abandoned cars around. I had taken the rear plate off of one with an expired tag and put that on his car. Next, I slashed all 4 tires with a small slit so the air would slowly be gone by the time he was leaving. Now, I was only able to see the first part of my plan from the perch. He came out from the office, saw the car sitting low to the ground, and started screaming like a banshee. And this is how I imagine the rest. He pays to get the car towed. They replace, patch the tires, and he drives off. Engine fails eventually because of the sand, etc. Tows it again, pays for repairs, or new rebuilt engine, drives off, and is pulled over for expired plates. Since he arrogantly never took my information and never even looked at the repair estimate, he didn't know the name of his saboteur. I actually didn't tell anyone about this when it was going on. My girlfriend would not have approved, and very few since. But about a year later, I drove by the office and saw it was no longer his. I feel like the woman probably would have done the right thing, but she was just mixed up with a jerk. Hopefully, the events I started made it clear to her. Sweet, secret revenge.